Is there anyone here who loves sleep? I can see a few hands popping up here and there, and some people prompting others to put up their hands. Now, how much do you love sleep? Depends on how tired you are, it's true. Now, I never used to appreciate the value of sleep before I started working. So like, before I started working, I'd be up to like 2 o'clock in the morning just doing nothing, just wasting time. But I found as I started to work, because I cycle to work as well, so I do around 10 miles a day. Over the week, 50 miles. I realized sleep was just something that needed to happen, something I needed to do. I began not just to like sleep, but you know what the sweetest part about sleep was? Pressing that snooze button. There's something about the snooze button that, although I would look and think, okay, I don't have much time left, but I was comfortable, just keep on pressing that button. But the thing that I'm finding, the first time I press it, okay, I need to get ready. Then there's a second time I go to press it. It's like, okay, I still got some time left. A third, fourth, fifth time, maybe I fall asleep again during the 6th time. But then by the time I wake up, there's like panic. Like, okay, I have half an hour to get showered, to have breakfast, to get dressed, and to get to the train station. And my whole morning just becomes a scattergun approach to everything. I may forget my rail card, I may forget my key or a pass for work, just because I decided to hit that snooze button and sleep for just a bit longer. Now, I believe that God doesn't like sleep. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, the 8 laws of health, rest is in there. I believe that God doesn't like sleep. Because if we read Luke chapter 21, verse 36 again, it says, "Watch ye therefore and pray always, that ye may be counted worthy to escape all these things which shall come to pass, to stand before the Son of Man." See, people who are sleeping spiritually, they won't be watching and praying. If we're asleep spiritually, we won't be watching and praying, and therefore won't be able to stand. If we're unable to stand, then we won't be counted worthy to meet the Son of Man. Now, if we look at Luke chapter 21 and just go back a few verses to verse, I believe, 24. That's Luke chapter 21 and verse, let's say, I'll read from verse 25 instead. And this is Jesus speaking about the end times to the disciples. He's saying, "And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth the distress of nations, which with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring." And verse 26 says, "Men's hearts failing them from fear, and for looking after these things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaking." So throughout Luke chapter 21, he's been explaining what's going to happen in the end times. And do we believe that we're living in these times now? Yes. So Jesus is speaking to us for our day in 2016 on the 23rd of April. He is saying that the earth is going to be in a state of fear. That there's going to be these earthquakes, these things happening in the world, and there's just going to be a widespread fear. I think just in these last 2 weeks, there's been the earthquakes we've seen in Japan. I believe it was in Ecuador or Colombia. They had around 2, and they were very high on the Richter scale. A lot of destruction happening in those places where these calamities have hit. And there is fear spreading, thinking, where is next? Who is next? Am I next? And then we have the fear from the threats of terrorism and terror happening in the world. Again, people thinking, when it happens, in America, or it happens out in Asia, we think, never in Europe. But then, just at the end of last year, just across the channel in France, there was the attack at the Bataclan in France on that, I believe, Friday evening. Fear spread through Europe. And now many of us are thinking, or the world is wondering, what is going to happen next? Because if the world didn't think that there was a crisis or that there was something which is to come, scientists wouldn't be spending so much money trying to find water on Mars. Or if the world didn't think that something is to come, there wouldn't be people preparing like little bunkers below their house, storing up over 60 guns and storing it with beer. This is actually a true thing I was listening to yesterday. That there's someone out in America that they believes there's going to be some sort of like zombie apocalypse. So what he's done, he's purchased over 60 guns, and he's purchased crates and crates of beer, so that when people who aren't prepared are in that crisis, that he's able to be the one who's in control and also defend himself with the guns. Now, we know from the Bible that there is a crisis to come, but is this how God wants us to prepare? By trying to find life on Mars, on another planet, or by stocking our homes full of weapons and thinking, yes, I've seen the Hollywood films, I know what to do in a time of crisis. Is this how God wants us to prepare? So God has told us, again, if I just read verse 36 again of Luke 21, that if I watch and pray, that I watch ye therefore and pray always, that ye may be counted and worthy to escape all things which are to come and stand before the Son of Man. So if I am to escape these things, if you are to escape these things, the thing we need to learn to do is watch and pray. Now, in Revelation chapter 6, verses 15 to 17, so Revelation chapter 6, verses 16 to 17. Sorry, verses 15 to 17. The Bible reads, "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to what? Stand. Who shall be able to stand?" So this question of being able to stand, it's something that's going to be asked just before Jesus returns. But who can stand? Those who watch and pray. So if I'm not watching and not praying, can I stand? No. So this thing of watching and praying is something that is of utmost importance to you and I, if we stand any chance of being counted worthy to meet Jesus face to face. But I'm thankful that this question of who's able to stand, it's answered perfectly and clearly throughout the Word of God. Because God doesn't want to leave us in a state of confusion and this fear that will cause men's hearts to fail. Because there's something about fear which can cause us to act out of the norm. There's something about fear which clouds our judgment and just gets us on the wrong path. Or there's something about fear where we just begin to do things which we otherwise wouldn't do. You see, it's through fear, when you're fearful, sometimes it's even all in our heads where the fear comes from. But I think it's in 2 Timothy when Paul says that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. So this is why God does not want us to fear these things, but focus on Him. Because fear, it counteracts His power, us experiencing His love, and us having a sound mind. But then, if we are not watching and praying, we have fallen into a condition of sleep. But now, if we read verse 34 of Luke 21, Jesus outlines exactly what it is which puts us to sleep. So that's Luke chapter 21 and verse 34. it says, and take heed to yourselves, lest at any time, so when he says any time, what does this mean? Like at any time, so you should, whatever Jesus is about to say next, you should never ever let it happen, not even for a second. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this world, so that the day may come upon you unaware or unexpected. Now, we're going to look through these things about surfeiting of the cares of this world and drunkenness, because if I'm not mistaken, we've already read in Luke chapter, in verse 25, that there's going to be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and even on the earth. So if there's going to be all these signs, these unmissable signs, but yet the cares of this world, drunkenness, and this thing called surfeiting, it can cause Jesus' return to come upon us unaware. We need to be aware of these things because there's something about them that may be so terrible, which it clouds the very things which we see happening before our eyes. So here we've just been given the warning that if we do not watch and pray, then the second coming, despite all these signs which we've read about, it will just simply catch us off guard, that we will be unprepared. So these very things are surfeiting. It simply means like an excess, or I believe if we were to look further into the word, it would kind of be like a hangover of some sorts. But then drunkenness and cares of this world. So is the Bible saying that if I don't drink alcohol, then I'm going to be prepared for the second coming? Yes or no? Maybe? Non-rhetorical questions? Okay. So then the question still being left of who is able to stand. But then, so what do these things mean? So in verse 34, what we just read, Jesus says, take heed lest at any time our hearts be overcharged. So overcharged in the Greek, it simply means burdened. So Jesus is saying, be aware that at any time you are burdened with surfeiting, drunkenness, and the cares of this world. But then, could it be that someone sitting here today, even in the Adventist church, are overcome with burdens, are overcome with the cares of this world? Could it be that somehow, even though we've come here today on the Sabbath, and we know, yes, we're supposed to be resting in perfect communion with God, but all our mind is focusing on is our bills, or the things we need to do at work, or even what we're going to do after Sabbath, or what we're going to do on the weekend, or that wedding we can't wait to attend, or the birthday party we have going on, or our different exams, or the different cares of this world, which are weighing us and burdening us down. Because I believe that if we let go of Jesus spiritually and fall into this sleep that he warns against, then these things it's so much easier for these burdens to just overtake us and overcome us. Because recently I've been traveling around to different churches and speaking at quite a few of them. And I've started to realize that there's pretty much two types of Christians. How many types? Two. So last year, does everyone know about Prayer Warriors? Yes. Okay, so last year when I was at Prayer Warriors, because part of my role of being on the youth advisory is to try and promote these different youth events and to encourage the youth to come out to them. Now, in my promotion, I was telling people and speaking to the youth about this, and they were saying, coming up with reasons why they couldn't attend, like, I have exams, or I'm tired, or I'm a bit too busy, or I have X, Y, and Z going on. And at the time, I was like, okay, cool, that's fine. But then, when I got to Prayer Warriors, I was interested at what brought a few of the people down. So I remember asking one of my friends, so why did you come today? He said, I came here because I have exams. Another one said, I came here because I'm tired, or I came here because I'm weak. I came here because I'm so busy that all I need to do is pray. So whilst some of the burdens of the world, that we cannot escape them, but it depends how we respond to them. Because these burdens that we have and we face, the cares of the world, they should point us straight back to Jesus. Because whilst there were those who saying that I will not come to this prayer event because I have exams, people recognize that due to the fact I have exams, or because I'm busy and because I'm tired, I need to pray, or I need Jesus all the more. I believe that Jesus, that he can't wait until he looks down in our churches and just sees a sea of people who, because they're tired, they go to prayer meeting. Or because they have bills, they decide that they need to be at church earlier. Or because they're stressed about everything with life, they think, okay, I need to be studying my word because God promises me a peace of mind. This is something that not only Jesus wants to see, but I would love to see in our churches also. I would love to see a group of young people whose chief burden or chief concern isn't their degree, or isn't keeping up with the Kardashians and these different things, or having the latest iPhone, or hoping that Jesus doesn't quite come back because they're not married yet, or they haven't found their husband or wife yet. Because I believe that if we were grounded in the Word, and if we truly took these burdens and these cares of life to Jesus, what we would find is that we'd be content with the possessions we have. What we would find is that we would realize that, okay, yes, I'm doing my degree, but a knowledge of God is so much more precious than a knowledge of business or a knowledge of law or these different things in the world. And what we would also find is that God hasn't promised everybody a husband or wife, so you don't know if that's his will for you. But now, when we are weighed down and when we are burdened, and when we are overwhelmed by the things of this world, our duty isn't to strive to fix this ourselves. Our duty isn't to put plasters over these cracks of life and think, yes, this will sort it. But our duty is, like how Jesus says, that come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. See, we cannot overcome our struggles and our burdens without first presenting them to God. Whether our burden is paying our bills, if we learn of Jesus, we would realize or recognize that only Jesus can sustain us. The paycheck that we get at the end of the month, it's not from the companies that we work for, but it is God's sustenance working through these companies. If our burden is our education, we would realize that Jesus, he is the good teacher. Whatever our burden is, we can bring it to God, for he will surely give us rest. Now, to watch as well, it means that we should stay awake, and drunkenness and the cares of this world, it puts us in this state of sleep. Let's turn to Psalm chapter 66, verse 1 and verse 2. Psalms chapter 66, verse 1 and verse 2. Psalm chapter 61, sorry. It's where David says, hear my cry, O Lord, and attend unto my prayer. And from the ends of the earth will I cry unto thee. For when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock which is higher than I. You see, when David was overwhelmed, when David was burdened, there was one place he knew he could go to. He didn't ask to be turned to his mother or to his friends or to his boyfriend, to his girlfriend. I don't know what's the boyfriend, but you get the point. That he didn't want to be turned to these things, but all he wanted was the rock, which is Christ. The rock which is higher than he is. Because remember when I was speaking, when I was speaking to children briefly about fear, there's one thing with fear, that it reveals where our affections are. Because when we are fearful, when we're burdened or overwhelmed, we want to be in a place where we find comfort, where we find peace. Now, one thing I realized with, I have two nieces now. I think one's 7 and 3 years old. And being the good uncle that I am, when I'm babysitting my nieces, one thing I would realize is that, say if they would happen to fall by themselves, it's not due to my care, when they would happen to fall by themselves, and they would, cut their knee and they would be crying, and if I'm the only one around, they would run straight to me for that comfort. But then if my mum or their grandma was around, instead of running to me, they would run to the grandma. And if mommy and daddy are around, they would bypass me, grandma, and go straight to mommy and daddy. Because the simple reason is that's where they find their most loved. That's where they find their most at peace. That's where they find their true comfort. That's why David, when he was overwhelmed, he wanted to be led to the rock. My question from this verse is, when you and I are overwhelmed with the cares of this world, when we're burdened by the cares of this world, who do we turn to? Where do we go? Is God our first point of call? Or can we not wait to get on the phone to our friends and try and just unburden our hearts to them? Or is our first point of call to be led to the rock, which is higher than I? So the cares of this world, that it should lead us to depend on Jesus all the more. Because whilst we see the uncertainty and the insecurities of the world, the merits of Christ, they should shine so much brighter than the things we see in this world. But whilst we're still speaking about the points of sleep and the things which send us to sleep, can we turn to 1 Testimonials chapter 5, verse 3 to 8? And the Bible will show us exactly what keeps us awake in these end times. That's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3 to 8. And the Bible reads that when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them, as travail upon a woman with child. They shall not escape. But ye, brethren, ye are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night, and we are not of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us do what? Watch and be sober. Sober, the opposite of drunkenness. So let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love for a helmet, the hope of salvation. So here with keeping awake spiritually and staying awake spiritually, not falling into the cares of this world, the drunkenness and the surfeiting, Paul is directly connecting the armor of God with us staying awake. He's connecting the love of God. He's connecting the hope of salvation. He's connecting faith with us staying awake spiritually. Because if we remember in Luke 21, verse 25 and 26, the reason that men are fearing and their hearts are failing them for this fear, their focus is completely on the things which are happening in the world, or what is to come, rather than who is to come. So whilst they're focusing on the calamities, whilst they're focused on this, they're just filled with fear. But Paul, he's saying, if we direct our attentions to God, we find faith, we find love, we find hope of salvation, which will keep us awake and alert, which help us to watch and pray. So there's one group in these last days which will be crying out peace and safety. So saying that there's none of these calamities going on, or the things which the Bible prophesied, that none of this is actually happening. And that these Seventh-day Adventists are just running around being these conspiracy theorists who just can't wait for the next thing to happen. But even in church, we find some of these people who, when they hear some things about prophecy being fulfilled, they will say, peace and safety, this isn't really happening, or you're just a bit too focused on this. Why don't you just talk about the love of God more? Well, the love of God is rooted deep and entrenched into prophecy. You cannot disconnect the two. So we see these people running around saying peace and safety, that there's nothing to worry about, that the earth is fine. But Paul describes these people as asleep. Jesus would describe these people as not watching or praying. That successful watching and praying is essential for us surviving these end times and standing before the Son of God. Now, I wanted to take note of something that we just read in 1 Testimonials. What did Paul say that the breastplate of righteousness was? A breastplate of... And then there was something else added onto that? So the breastplate of righteousness with faith and love. And now if we turn to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 16, which speaks about the full armor of God. That's Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 16. Actually, we'll read more than verse 16. If I read from verse 13, it says, "Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand the evil, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." So then, whilst we're still talking about standing, Jesus connects watching and praying with being able to stand. And Paul's saying that if we put on the whole armor of God, we shall be able to stand. Verse 14. "Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet be shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, take the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench the fiery darts of the wicked, and the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints." Now, this thing about the breastplate which we're to put on, at first Paul said of faith and love. And what's this second one he's described it as? This breastplate of righteousness. I accidentally gave the answer earlier. So could it be that if we are to stand in the end times, that Jesus wants us to be an experience of a righteousness by faith, which works by love? Because in this end times where their hearts are failing them for fear, there's no telling what the fear will drive them to do. Because whilst we see the different things happening in the world, and if we keep our ears open to the news reports, when there's a calamitous event which happens, usually the politicians or something which wouldn't usually be passed, there's a certain law that just gets pushed through, or a certain action which gets taken, which never ever would have happened before. Like, it was a few months ago, the Pope's visit to America. If you know the history of America, historically, a colossal event that America, it pretty much exists just because of the Protestants who are opposed to the papacy. And now, after all these events and all these calamities which are happening, they're looking for peace, they're looking for security. And this fear is driving them to form a union which 10, 20, 30 years ago never would have happened, or never would be possible. But now, whilst we're looking and whilst we're praying and whilst we're asking, how do we watch and pray? How are we able to stand? Because we've all taken exams before, we know that the preparation for an exam, it doesn't come on the final day. It doesn't even happen the night, or it shouldn't even happen the night before, or even the week before. As soon as you know you have that exam, this is when you should be studying, when you should be preparing this exam. So let me tell you that there is a crisis that will come. There is an event, the return of Christ will shake the world. After this, there is no more deciding which side we're on. We need to be prepared before this day comes. This crisis, it will not develop our character or develop this experience of righteous by faith, which works by love. It will simply reveal to us who we are. It will reveal which side we have been playing all along. Because if you think in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus, he was speaking to his disciples, he again told them to watch and pray. But yet, whilst Jesus remained praying, the disciples were sleeping. And when it got to the final crisis, when Christ was on the cross, there was not a disciple in sight who was standing for him, who was standing beside him. Peter even went to the length of denying who Christ was, or that he even knew him. Because Peter, he hadn't watched and prayed. He was asleep during his time of preparation. So this crisis, it just simply revealed that Peter was a coward. He was a coward before then, and he was a coward at that immediate crisis. Not a single disciple who slept at that very moment stayed completely faithful to God. Some while ago, in California, in America, there was another earthquake which had hit that land. Now, if you were able to speak to the people who were around at that time, they would tell you how the destruction was terrible. It was unrecognizable, the horizon, because of the destruction which had taken place. But now, one preacher was reminiscing about this and was recounting how he spoke to his friend about the earthquake which took place. And his friend said to the preacher that, the day before the earthquake hit, the day before the crisis hit, every single building looked exactly the same. But after this earthquake hit, the ones which were able to stand, they were simply the ones who had the correct foundations, the ones who had been built accordingly, the ones whose, in their makeup, it was designed for them to be able to withstand in this crisis. When this final event of Christ's appearance come, it may just be that there will be people to our left and our right, that all these buildings, or we all look the same. We all look like faithful followers of Christ who will truly stand in the end time. But Christ's return, it will simply reveal if we've been watching and praying. It will reveal if we're able to stand, or if we have been able to stand. The question which we read in Revelation chapter 6, when the earth is asking, who shall be able to stand? We know from the words of Jesus, from the words in Luke chapter 21, verse 36, that those who are able to stand are those who will watch and pray. So my final question to you is, are you watching? Are you praying? Or what have you been watching? What have you been praying for? Or what haven't you been praying for? So at this time, I would simply like to ask that if it's your desire to be able to stand in that great day, that I'm not going to ask you to come from the front, but that you simply begin to watch and pray. You simply keep your eyes on Jesus. You make him the rock which is higher than you, that you make him your first desire, that when these things, these cares of the world begin to overtake us, we can simply turn to Christ. We find our shelter there in a time of storm, and that we're truly able to watch and pray so that we may be able to stand. Amen.